We bring you news and analysis every day on the Sound On podcast. But now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Search Bloomberg News Now and subscribe today.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Day 3 with no permanent Speaker of the House and 43 days to a possible government shutdown. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the race for Speaker gets underway in earnest. But the debate over funding the government is on ice because of all of this. We're joined ahead by Congressman Brad Sherman. The Democrat from California serves on financial services as well as the foreign affairs committees. And join those voting to remove Kevin McCarthy this week. He'll be with us in just a moment. New fundraising numbers out from the Republican campaign trail. Donald Trump outraising Ron DeSantis by threefold. And some members of the RNC are now questioning whether to have any more debates at all. We'll talk about it all with our panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis, joined today by Democratic analyst Alvin Jordan from ROKK Solutions. Little Friday, as we call it around here, and not a lot has changed from this time yesterday as we consider the lack of motion on Capitol Hill when it comes to not only funding our government, but finding another Speaker of the House. As we prepare to talk this out with Brad Sherman, we actually heard some advice from the other chamber. Republican leader Mitch McConnell loath to give advice to Kevin McCarthy, at least publicly during his tenure as Speaker, and he clearly does not want to see this again.
I have no advice to give to House Republicans except one. I hope whoever the next Speaker is gets rid of the motion to vacate. I think it makes the Speaker's job impossible. And the American people expect us to have a functioning government.
Get rid of the motion to vacate. That's where we begin our conversation with Congressman Brad Sherman. He's with us, of course, the Democrat from California, back on Bloomberg. It's good to see you, sir, and I appreciate your time. I'd like to ask you about this entire process, but I wonder if you agree with Mitch McConnell. You weighed in back in January in the Speaker's fight, saying at some point here Republicans need to work with Democrats. Can they do that while there's still a motion to vacate?
They will try to perhaps change the rules to get rid of the motion to vacate. I doubt Democrats will help them do that. When we take the majority in 2024, I'm sure we will not have a motion to vacate. But if they're going to ask us to help them change the rules, we've got a lot of rules that we think we ought to change.
Well, there we go. So let's get into this just a little bit here. I wonder your thoughts, first of all, on Republicans blaming Democrats for firing Kevin McCarthy. That's the narrative that we've been hearing from a lot of GOP lawmakers, Congressman. You voted to oust Kevin McCarthy.
Every Democrat voted to vacate the chair. We don't think that Kevin McCarthy is a good speaker. We think Hakeem Jeffries would be an excellent speaker. If we can't get him installed this year, we've got next year.
What do you think is going to happen next week? And I know that you're looking at this from the Democratic side of the aisle, and nobody's consulting you right now on Jim Jordan versus Steve Scalise, but you know these individuals.
I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Scalise in the number one position and Jordan in the number two position. I also wouldn't be surprised if we have continuing chaos. But I think their craziest members may have gotten their pound of flesh. They may have and may be willing to abide by the tradition, which is if your caucus selects a leader, you vote for that leader for Speaker of the House. But if even 5 of their members don't decide to go along with that tradition, we voted for Hakeem Jeffries 15 times last roll call back in January, and we're ready to do it again 15 times or 115 times.
And you'll be voting for Hakeem Jeffries.
115 times.
According to many, has been very disruptive and will be to the process of funding the government. Congressman, are you bracing for a shutdown on November 17th?
Absolutely. I mean, even if McCarthy had gotten what he wanted was to pass a resolution, as crazy as people wouldn't vote for, that slashed food for pregnant women and infants, that slashed federal aid to education around the country. That was what he wanted. Now, you can imagine the Democrats in the Senate aren't going to take that up. So I would suspect that we're going to have some very tough negotiations. And the question will be whether any compromise is one, A, that a new Republican speaker is willing to accept, and B, maybe they move to vacate the chair at their extremes, because I can be sure nothing that can pass the Senate is going to get Gates to vote for it. So the only way to keep the government open is to have a speaker who's willing to put on the floor a bill that Gates won't vote for.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the economy and the trajectory of interest rates from your perch on the Financial Services Committee. This is something we've discussed before. Of course, the battle against inflation. We're hearing higher for longer, and we spoke today on Bloomberg with Mary Daly, the San Francisco Fed president. Here's what she said.
My job, as I see it, our job, as I see it, is not to tighten, just do our part. It's to watch financial conditions, because monetary policy works. We raise the funds rate, and it moves through all the other interest rates. If financial conditions are sufficiently tight, our work is not necessary, because we don't need to boost them more.
Where do you think we're going with this, Congressman? Higher for longer is the narrative right now, but we've seen this change on a dime depending on the trajectory of the economy. Tomorrow we're going to get jobs numbers. Will that be another inflection point?
It'll be another one. If I knew where interest rates were going, I wouldn't be on this TV show with you. I'd be on the phone with my broker. But I would say that the recent decline in oil prices will certainly help control inflation. Oil is not only what we pay at the pump, but it's based into the transportation cost of everything you buy. So I'm hoping that we can get inflation controlled without going higher for longer, but we'll see.
You think the Fed should hike again or start preparing for rate cuts? I think you've been pretty consistent on this, but the data prices have been stubborn.
I think they have to be data driven. I have argued for a 2.3% target rather than a 2% target, but whichever target you have, it's still above that number. And it is so hard to manage the economy using interest rates when their main effect is months after you make the decision. It would be like driving a car where when you turn the wheel, you go half a mile before the effect of that.
I can't talk to you without bringing up your favorite topic, which of course is crypto. And we're watching the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried unfold here. You wrote on Twitter, crypto bros will say SBF was one snake in a crypto Garden of Eden. In truth, though, crypto, you say, is a garden of snakes. You go on to write, while his ghost still roams the halls of Congress today, he faces justice. How is his ghost still alive in Congress? Are you referring to donations that have gone unreturned?
More his advocacy for bills that would get the SEC out of the crypto world and provide only a patina of regulation through the CFTC. His goal, his reason for being here in this very building, the Rayburn building, was to try to get the SEC out of crypto. And that in itself tells you we got to get the SEC more into crypto. This is a currency that has no advantage over the dollar, except in its name. It is literally hidden money. And when you see a New Jersey senator with gold bars and huge amounts of cash, you realize just how more efficient that would be in a crypto world where you don't need cash, you don't need gold bars. You just have secret accounts and unhosted wallets.
I understand there's an eviction underway in the Capitol, Congressman. I wonder your thoughts on Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer losing their hideaway space. One of the first actions, if not the first, taken by the new acting speaker, Patrick McHenry.
I think this is an incredibly petty move. It has no political benefit except within the Republican caucus, where they can say, look, we just smacked down two Democratic leaders, and maybe that will make them feel good enough to unite behind a new speaker. But it's a really bad face for the Republican Party.
Thanks for being back with us, Brad Sherman, Congressman from California, here on Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington as we assemble our panel. Rick Davis is back with us today. Bloomberg Politics contributor, of course, and Republican strategist, joined as well by Alvin Jordan, Vice President, ROKK Solutions, Democratic analyst. Good to see both of you here. I wonder if you agree, Alvin, this idea of kicking Nancy Pelosi out of her quarters here, her hideaway, as they call in the Capitol building, typically an honor reserved for a former speaker. Is this just the way the game is played now?
I agree. We've reached the point of, petty politics in that way. But if the long-term goal is to, kind of consolidate and bring, the Republicans closer together, the hope would have to be, beyond the pettiness, that this is something that will at least, start to align and combine forces in a way. So petty for sure. But if the long-term goal is constructive, I think given all that we've seen, this is par for the course.
Rick Davis, what do you think about the latest here? Are you surprised no new names have emerged, that Republicans are, in fact, it appears, coalescing around a race between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan for Speaker?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that other names have not emerged. I think that the two of them moved quickly and decisively into the vacuum that was created by the former Speaker McCarthy's ouster. So if they had waited for the end of the week, let's say, to make this announcement, you might have seen other people testing the water. But their teams got out quick, started calling members and rounding up support. So I think most people look at this and say, the question isn't like, can we accommodate other candidates in the field? I think the real question is, can either of these candidates actually get to 218? Everybody I've talked to today is having a hard time seeing how either one of them get to that number. And so it may be that we're premature and that these guys have to sort of play out the political scenario in their caucus. And if they can't get to 218 before the vote is taken, then maybe somebody else gets elevated to a compromise candidate of some kind. But we're going to see how these two battle it out and see whether or not they can get to the magic number.
Aides to Kevin McCarthy are calling lawmakers on Jim Jordan's behalf, Alvin. Is that a help or a hindrance after what just happened?
I think it's all a hindrance at this point. To be completely honest and on some level, I think fair, the House Republicans at this point have shown that they are in complete disarray and don't have a real vision or path forward. And so, honestly, I think we're getting to the point of, I would like to see a new speaker altogether. I don't think it would be an issue if we saw, say, a King Jeffries take over as the speaker role, just because I don't know how much faith Americans can actually have that any of this back and forth is productive in that way.
Rick, you know how to spread the word on Capitol Hill. You know how to whip votes. You know how to get support for something that a lawmaker is pushing. What's going to happen behind the scenes then? Most lawmakers are out of town over the next several days, because on Monday it's going to be go time, where these candidates are actually starting to pitch their colleagues with formal final arguments before an election day.
Yeah, it's a combination of geographic outreach. We know that both Scalise and Jeffries made presentations to the Texas delegation, 25 Republican members strong, doing the same thing with other delegations that have high concentration of Republican members. But then they're also cross-pressuring the five families, the Republican Study Commission, the Freedom Caucus, the Problem Solver. I mean, there's a whole outreach campaign going on with these folks on an ideological basis, which is interesting because neither one of these candidates, Scalise or Jordan, are known to be real, players in any of these organizations, right? And so a lot of it is deal making amongst the five families. Who can get consolidation of votes, right? You can't do it one by one. It's just too big a problem. But there are some influential members like Kevin McCarthy, who is the only one who could garner 210 votes. Couldn't get to 218, but he could get to 210. And so having him call actually is, I think, a big advantage, because there are a lot of people who wish he was still speaker and frankly wish he would run again. And maybe that's one of the scenarios, is if neither one of these guys can get to that magic number, maybe he re-enters the race. Who knows? I don't think anybody knows how this is going to turn out yet.
That's why it's remarkable. And I'm holding out for that to happen, Alvin. I don't know about you. I know you're a Democrat looking across the aisle, but if neither Scalise or Jordan get to 218, we go another 15 rounds. Let's say it's next Friday. Kevin McCarthy's sitting there with his arms folded, smirking. Then what?
I mean, on the one hand, I have to say, kudos for him to be in a position to where we could even look over at him to see the smirk, right? I don't know that, given what we've seen, that's the healthiest path forward, even if it's a viable one. I think we're at a place truly where we got to, figure out a path to get someone that can, again, taking a step back, someone that can give confidence that the government and the country is headed in the right direction.
Right. Rick Davis and Alvin Jordan, our great panel today as we come back to consider the rules. Is Mitch McConnell right? Does the motion to vacate need to go away to save the House? That's next on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Will Donald Trump save Republicans in the House? This is a real question, as The Messenger now reports that the former president may visit House Republicans as the speaker race heats up. They say he's intrigued about the idea of being temporary speaker. We told you that yesterday. He was asked about it in the courthourse in New York. Remember this?
Who should be speaker, Mr. President?
A lot of people have been calling me about speaker. All I can say is we'll do whatever is best for the country and for the Republican Party.
Would you take the job? Would you take the job?
We have some great people.
Would you take the job?
A lot of people have asked me about it. I'm focused. We're leading. I don't know you. I'm sure you don't read too much in the papers. But we're leading by like 50 points for president. My focus is totally on that. If I can help them during the process, I would do it. But we have some great people in the Republican Party that could do a great job as speaker.
A lot of people are asking about it. Let's reassemble the panel. Rick Davis and Alvin Jordan are with us. Rick, what do you think? Donald Trump swoops in. You can imagine his view on all this, right? Temp speaker in the rostrum, dropped a gavel a couple times, then you move on to being president. You own Washington. Is this actually going to happen?
Well, it certainly goes with the master brand magician that he is, to constantly resurrect himself. And I got to admit, it would be one of the great moves of all time politically. I doubt if the House Republicans need that level of, I would say, division within their ranks at this stage. I know many of the members I've talked to are hopeful that going through this process will actually help unite them as a caucus. I think that's a wish that will likely not come true. But having Donald Trump at the helm during an election process, wow, that would be highly entertaining. I'd love to see it. Go ahead, guys. Bring him in. As if he hasn't got enough to do, like run for president or stay out of jail, right? So if we're going to make a mockery of the democratic process, let's get started and go big.
Well, as we learned, there'd have to be a rule change, because at the moment you cannot be indicted and be speaker. But as I read in the Messenger, Alvin, he's deeply attracted to the idea, and his phone is blowing up with Republicans urging him to go to Washington. Is this a Democratic dream come true?
You can call me. I'll just say, like, okay. I mean, to even hear the lead-in of, you know, all of this coming live from the courthouse as we await a litany and a long laundry list of indictments, it really is a joke. And if the goal truly is to, again, make a joke of American democracy, then absolutely. I said, let's go for it. We can sell pay-per-view and get our, you know, subscribers up as a country, because at that point it would be complete and utter comedy, to be honest. No, we can't do it. We shouldn't even entertain it. The fact that it is being entertained, I think, is just, in this case, you know, just more ammunition for Democrats for sure.
Well, they say C-SPAN's the original reality TV, right? The source tells the Messenger that Trump is entertaining, becoming speaker on an interim basis for a few months. I don't know how he would work all of that into Rick's point, but I also wonder what Mitch McConnell would think about that. Not a big Donald Trump fan, if you want to consider actual gridlock. But I wonder both of your thoughts on Mitch McConnell's advice, a rare bit of advice from the Republican leader in the Senate for whoever next holds the gavel. Here's what he said.
I have no advice to give to House Republicans except one. I hope whoever the next speaker is gets rid of the motion to vacate. I think it makes the speaker's job impossible, and the American people expect us to have a functioning government.
I suspect you agree with that, Rick, but would that be possible with the scenario we have here and how difficult it will be, clearly, for anyone to reach 218?
Yeah. Look, I can see the scenario where they make a change. Republicans realize, Joe, that this isn't helping them, right? There are, other than 8 members, there are no other Republicans in the House of Representatives who think this has been a good week, and that they're actually getting the job done for the American people by actually not being able to do their job because they don't have a speaker. So if you go with the premise that they all see this as a wake-up call, then in the process of anointing someone, the next speaker in that caucus, which is where you're going to get those 218 votes, I can see a open conversation about the fact that we need to make a change so that the next speaker doesn't get put through the ringer the way Kevin McCarthy was put through it by a very small minority of Republicans. And I would say they've lost a lot of credibility by taking down the speaker and throwing this House into disarray. So maybe they're on the defense enough to be willing to make that change.
This goes back to 2018. Nancy Pelosi, Alvin, where are Democrats on the motion to vacate? And as Mitch McConnell said, getting rid of it.
Again, who knew that Mitch McConnell being the voice of reason was on the bingo card for 2023? I surely did not. But I will say I have to agree with him. It's the same as if I desire to watch the television in my house and I swap batteries from a different appliance. I can't be surprised when the old batteries fail and I'm no longer able to use my functioning equipment. It's the same in this case. Like no one can truly be looked to do their job if their hand is tied behind their back. And so I agree. I think at some point have to make a concession because otherwise we'll be right back where we are today. And I don't think anyone wants that.
Of course, whatever happens with government funding, a lot of it is going to hinge on the debate over border security. That's what brought us to the brink of a shutdown just a week ago, and we're certainly not done with this yet. And there's news on this today, and it might not be one you would expect. The headline on the terminal, Biden says he tried to stop plans to add to Trump's border wall. We just heard from the president in the Oval Office on this. You guys may have seen the news here. That the White House, the administration, has announced plans to add roughly 17 miles along the Rio Grande in Texas, the Trump border wall that Joe Biden at one time said would not happen. In fact, here's what he said to NPR about this.
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed on my administration.
Not another foot. Fast forward to today in the Oval Office. He took one question after a brief photo opportunity.
I'll answer one question on the border wall. The border wall, the money was appropriated for the border wall. I tried to get them to reappropriate, to redirect that money. They didn't. They wouldn't. And in the meantime, there's nothing under the law other than they have to use the money for what it was appropriated. I can't stop that.
Do you believe the border wall works?
No.
Doesn't believe it works, but we're adding 17 miles. Rick, you're more familiar with the appropriations process than most Americans. There's not much he can do here, but it's not a good look, is it?
No, but the entire mess on the border is not a good look. I'd say this is a component of that. It brings it up so that he had to deal with it today. But the reality is he needs comprehensive solution to immigration, or he will get nitpicked to death. And by the way, presidents before him had the same problem. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We can't allow 3 million people in 1 year to walk across the border, declare asylum and migrate to cities all across America, creating all kinds of pressure on the economies of those cities. This is a president who has a chance to do something about it between now and Election Day. And the idea that you just shirk it back and say, I don't agree with what Congress appropriated, or I don't think you can do anything in election year, is a cop-out. Do something about immigration. It's hurting our country.
Alvin, Jordan, does the president need to come up with a better answer than that?
I think so. What's happening right now is so reactionary that, again, it is really, if you're, the former president, Trump, what else do you need by way of talking point as to say, oh, President Biden is completing my project? But I do think it shines a light on the larger problem that we're seeing, whether it be in places like Eagle Pass, Texas, or even in, New York City, there is a larger problem that needs to be addressed. And while, I can understand a bit of the, kind of spot duty that the president is doing now, as we roll into election season, I would hope that his team is putting together a foolproof plan to address what is becoming, one of the larger, if not, the largest issues kind of, facing our country at this time.
Yeah, you better believe there'll be a lot more to follow on this. Alvin, Jordan, and Rick Davis, our panel today, as we turn next to the latest fundraising haul by Donald Trump, triple that of Ron DeSantis. We'll take a look at the numbers on the GOP trail.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app, or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Is there any point in calling Ron DeSantis the second place candidate any longer? It's not just the polls, it's the money. As the Trump campaign and the DeSantis campaign report fundraising from the last quarter, and there's really no comparison, Donald Trump, and this is according to the campaign, raised more than $45.5 million in the last quarter, triple what Ron DeSantis is putting up here at $15 million, and that's down from 20 in the second quarter. So fundraising and polling numbers are declining for Ron DeSantis. By the way, $3 million of that 45 was from the mugshot. We finally can put a number on this. $3 million from T-shirts, coffee mugs, posters of the menacing mugshot from Georgia. Money in the bank, also no comparison. Donald Trump, 37.5, DeSantis, 5. As we reassemble our panel for their take, and new polling numbers out today that we'll touch on as well with Rick Davis and Alvin Jordan. Rick Davis, Republican strategist, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor. Alvin is a Democratic analyst with us from ROKK Solutions. Great to have you both here. Your thought on the fundraising here, Rick. RNC members are apparently questioning whether to even continue debates. How would you describe the state of this race?
Well, first of all, I mean, the ever shrinking Ron DeSantis campaign shrinks a little bit more. Not only has his polling been shrinking, but last quarter he raised 20 million. This quarter he raised 15. Next quarter, what is it going to be? 10. It's not a great trajectory to be on if you're trying to surmount a really, what seems like today, unsurmountable lead by Donald Trump. And the fact that he spent $10 million trying to, get to where he is, Ron DeSantis, you might want to rethink your spending strategy, because every dollar you're putting in, you're going down. I mean, it's not a good place to be. I've been there. It's not a good place to be. And it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the field does The reality is that I'm kind of curious whether or not Nikki Haley has been able to convert a couple of good debate performances into more cash, which she desperately needs to also wage a campaign against Donald Trump. So this is a very important report, and I think one that'll tell us a lot about the state of the race, not just the polling data.
Interesting you mentioned Nikki Haley. She comes in second in the most recent USA Today Suffolk poll in New Hampshire. Trump 49, Haley 19. It's down to 10 for Ron DeSantis in that same poll. Marquette is out today as well. This a national poll. Trump 56, DeSantis 12, Haley 6. What do you make of this, Alvin, specifically when it comes to the money? Is this conversation over, or is New Hampshire going to bring a surprise in Nikki Haley?
Well, I've used succession references here on Bloomberg programming before, and I'll use another one from Logan Roy now, which is money wins.
Oh boy.
And in America, that is, doubly true. And so I think it is exactly what it shows us, which is this is a demoralizing report if you're Governor DeSantis or Nikki Haley in this way, because you truly are, facing what seems like an insurmountable kind of, climb up the mountain in that way. And I think as the money becomes clearer, a mugshot, it even outpaces what it seems like would be, kind of record months and quarters for the others. Again, I think we talked about this when the last debate was looming, which was it truly, seemed like it was a race for second. And now we're learning that a race for second truly means, paces and paces behind former President Trump in that way. And so I think you have to truly, at this point, not only relook at the spending that you've done up into now, but also just truly, have those realistic conversations with your team to see if it's even possible to close the gap at all, which in my opinion, I think is close to impossible at this point.
Close to impossible. Rick, talk to us about the debates here. Next one is November 8th in Miami. They're begging Trump to show up. He won't. And now Politico's up with a story today saying that actual members of the RNC are questioning whether to continue in this format or at all because it's starting to embarrass the candidates and the parties. Are we going to do all of these still?
Yeah, look, part of it, you got to put on the candidates. Like the last debate was boring. A bunch of guys and gals snapping at each other. No real focus on the front runner. Nobody really answered a lot of, inspirational, questions weren't answered in an inspirational fashion. It was just kind of junk TV. And yeah, if that's what you're going to get, then you ought to quit doing it because it's not helping the Republican brand and it's not helping any of these candidates. The reality is I don't see the RNC putting any pressure on Donald Trump to join these debates when they put enormous pressure on everybody to qualify to be in these debates. So what bargain are you getting for playing by the RNC rules? None. So look, I think the RNC has really botched this. They look like, they were setting up this thing for like, oh, we're going to winnow the field really quickly. And it turns out that the field is not even participating in the debate. And everybody else on the fringes are like, making it all look bad. So I think the RNC chairman needs to sit down and say, what am I doing to the party here? And change the whole format of these things or just quit having them.
What if this was the DNC? Alvin, I realize it's not, but I'm just curious your view on this as a matter of principle. A party in a situation like this, a bunch of scheduled debates, a field of candidates, what would you suggest?
I think you have to find a way to get what seems your very clear, front runner in former President Trump involved. Whether that is, him doing separate interviews with Tucker Carlson or just his kind of post-trial interviews or press conferences, if you will. I think these are definitely eclipsing the efforts that they're trying to do in the conversation about money, wasting it essentially. So I think they have to have that real conversation with themselves as a committee and a collective and try to make sure that if The candidate is clear that they're putting their resources behind he or she, in this case, the former president. But I don't think that they can continue, regardless of whether it was the DNC or not, to move forward with a pace that is not benefiting them in any way.
That is absolutely incredible. Does it even matter? Does Trump counter-program these? Again, Rick, we only have 30 seconds, or does he just kind of ignore it like everybody else?
No, he'll counter-program it. I mean, he loves to sort of poke fun at these guys. So, yeah, I can't wait to see where he shows up next debate.
Me too. November 8th. I can't imagine. I guess he'll be nearby. They'll all be in Florida. By God. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington with our panel today, Rick Davis and Alvin Jordan on the fastest show in politics. We're live from Washington. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, where we have caught up with Kailey Leinz here in our studio. Join us on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Global News, and we'll be here waiting for you when you arrive. Nice to see you today. Not a lot has changed since we spoke this time yesterday. It's still on Capitol Hill, the same situation. Mm-hmm. Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, the only two to really raise their hands on a formal level to run for Speaker. And the funding debate is on ice until this is solved.
Oh, complete paralysis at the moment, because what is Speaker pro tempore Patrick McHenry able to do? We think not much. Do we know for sure? It's a little bit fuzzy.
We'll see if we need to see.
But the popular thinking is that really all that he's going to be able to preside over is a Speaker vote. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to happen until next Wednesday.
Right.
And between now and then, we could maybe see more hats tossed in the ring, but it does seem like it's these two candidates really leading right now.
I just want to know if they're going to change the rules for Donald Trump. We talked about this last hour when it was the messenger. Now we can tell you there's a terminal headline. NBC is also reporting that he's considering a visit to the Capitol amid the race for Speaker. He said yesterday, a lot of people are asking. Yep. The messenger said he's obsessed with this right now, and his phone is burning up with Republicans asking him to come to town.
Well, we know he can't be Speaker, right? Republican
unless
conference
they change the rules.
At
which
the moment,
they can do.
If you're under indictment, you cannot. The thing is, though, one of these individuals we're talking about who has already tossed their hat in formally, Jim Jordan, is a very close ally of Donald Trump. So I wonder if he does make an appearance, if it really is going to be to support him over Steve Scalise, or what exactly he would say.
Well, the messenger reported that he's been having this fantasy of actually having the job for a couple of months. You come in here, you hold the gavel. I mean, maybe he could slam that gavel even harder than Patrick McHenry did and sort of run the thing, take the lap, and then you just go down the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue and become president.
So be Speaker until November 2024? Be Speaker until Iowa?
He said a few months, until the campaign, until the first, maybe Iowa. We'll call it maybe the first trial of, I don't know. As he put it yesterday, a lot of people are asking.
Who should be Speaker?
Who should be Speaker, Mr. President?
A lot of people have been calling me about Speaker. All I can say is we'll do whatever is best for the country and for the Republican Party.
Would you take the job?
Great people.
Would you take the job?
We have some great people.
Would you take the job?
A lot of people have asked me about it. I'm focused.
A lot of people are asking me about it. The phone's burning up. I don't know what's going to happen, but they're asking, and we'll see. Of course, if that
we'll
comes,
find out more Tuesday.
You're going to be down there with. Can you imagine the media horde on that day when Donald Trump comes to the House?
I'll wear my sneakers.
I don't think he can resist it. I'll say that right now. This has to happen. He's not going to be able to resist it. So, elsewhere, Mitch McConnell says, if you want to do this right, lose the motion to vacate. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a complete new look at rules and everything when it'll be a brand new day, I guess, next week.
Well, and McConnell's not the only one. You have members of the House, Republican members of the House, saying we're not going to vote for anyone for Speaker if they don't change the rules. Because the idea is if you leave it where one individual can decide to move on the motion to vacate, we could very well be in a repeat scenario a few months from now.
Completely.
If there's one person who doesn't like what whoever the new speaker becomes is doing.
We'll just be on it'll be a revolving door, and then no one will really ever want the job.
Yeah.
Not that they're taking Mitch McConnell's advice right now. But we have to talk about this with Eli. I'm glad to say Eli Yokley is back, U.S. politics analyst at Morning Consults. Eli, it's good to see you. You're going to start running numbers here on this race like you would a presidential campaign?
I think we are. Check back in next week. I mean, all this situation needed was Donald Trump to insert himself into it.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about Donald Trump, obviously he is riding just a continued wave of support, and it just his lead keeps on growing and growing and growing. And maybe someone feeling that invincible might think, yeah, I could be Speaker of the House. There's no real sign of that fading, right, Eli?
Yeah. I mean, his level of support is incredible. It's like 3 in 5 potential Republican primary voters support his bid. There's not a lot of opposition to his ascent to the Republican presidential nomination next year. We have not yet asked voters where they are on him being Speaker of the House. It's hard to see him doing it, honestly. I mean, it's kind of a insular, real job that you have to get legislation done. You have to plan votes. You have to herd the cats of the House Republican Conference. But it's going to be a tough job for whoever gets it. I mean, one of the things we noticed that really stuck out to us in the last few weeks is there wasn't just like a popular uprising in the Republican electorate against Kevin McCarthy. Since the beginning of September, his standing with Republican voters who have views about him hasn't really changed. He's kind of popular, about twice as popular than unpopular with the Republican electorate. Clearly, this was an insular personal attack on Kevin McCarthy among these 8 House Republicans who just didn't like him. That motion to vacate, you're right, is a big gun over the heads of anybody who takes this job. And that's going to be pretty consequential in the coming weeks.
Well, that's true. And the idea of eliminating the motion to vacate is compelling. You see, Matt Gaetz tweeted about this. Kailey, producer James just sent this along. He says, okay, let's negotiate. And he retweeted something from ROKK. Actually, it was about ROKK and an anti-corruption plan that he put forth, a ban on congressional stock trading, 12-year limit for Congress, a ban on political donations from lobbyists or PACs. Matt Gaetz says, if we enact the reforms ROKK lays out there, I'll basically give you whatever you want on the motion to vacate for this stuff. Maybe we run numbers on this too. Eli, does this all get renegotiated after what we saw a couple days ago?
We'll see. I mean, it's a pretty good card to have if you're some of these conservative rabble-rousers. I think looking forward, the challenge for the Republican Party is that it's made some gains since 2016 and since 2020. When you ask voters about its capability to govern, it has an advantage on this question over the Democratic Party. We're going to see how much some of this stuff in Capitol Hill breaks through to the electorate. I mean, it's always important to remember some of these stories that we obsess with here in Washington don't really break through. I assume the speaker being ousted probably will. And I think that plus this prospect of another government shutdown, this continued spending debate, could do something to put a drag on the Republican Party when voters think about its ability to do the job moving forward.
Yeah, we're staring down that November 17th deadline. It's going to come up pretty quickly, especially if we potentially could be looking at a prolonged speaker fight, Eli. When we talk about, though, the issues on Capitol Hill, a lot of the issues that are going to be relevant in this speaker's race, whoever ultimately is vying to get the majority votes that they need, include Ukraine funding, big one. This is something that Jim Jordan told reporters yesterday. He is not in support of doing any further, despite what the Senate and administration may be seeing. Where are Americans on the issue of Ukraine funding, Eli?
Yeah, I mean, the electorate's funding Ukraine is still pretty popular among voters. It's less popular than it used to be. But I mean, part of that is just the American people aren't paying attention to the war like they did at the beginning of it. There's still a good chunk of voters who back supporting Ukraine. But you're right, it's divisive among Republican voters, and it's very divisive among Republicans on Capitol Hill. I mean, even Mitch McConnell's out there supporting it. There's a chunk of the Republican electorate who is still on board with sort of the old school American strength abroad. And then there's these new dissenters, but they have all the cards right now on Capitol Hill.
We're talking with Yokley at Morning Consult. I know you have new numbers on impeachment. And this is important because you're showing a backing actually increase among Republican voters, but we have really no way to move this forward until there's a speaker either. It's just one of the big points of business that we'll have to wait until this is solved. What are you learning?
Yeah, about 70% of Republican voters support the current impeachment inquiry Top line support hasn't really shifted. About half of the American electorate supports the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. I think that what we've seen in recent weeks, as House Republicans had their first hearing, is this is something that excites the Republican base. This is sort of a rallying cry among the average Republican voter and probably among some on Capitol Hill. I mean, it's a good thing to fall back on whenever you're having these spending debates. Ask people to take a hard vote on something, then go after Joe Biden the next day. It's always pretty popular to go after your opponent. This is something that riles up the Republican electorate, and I think it probably does too with the number of Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Does it have a galvanizing force for Democrats, though, on the other end, Eli?
I mean, what we're seeing is a bit of dissension among the Democratic electorate. About 3 in 10 Democratic voters support the current impeachment inquiry. That lines up pretty well with the level of opposition to President Joe Biden in a Democratic primary. I think clearly he is in the driver's seat of this primary. And the Democratic Party, he's the face of the Democratic Party. There's no chance of unseating him, but he does face some level of weakness and support among the Democratic base. I think one of the big things we're going to be watching in 2024 is you have 2 likely nominees for president who have very unique vulnerabilities, be it Joe Biden's age, be it Donald Trump's criminal liability. That sets up the prospect of maybe a low energy election in terms of voters showing up to the polls next November.
Just don't tell Donald Trump you said low energy. He just bagged $45.5 million in the last quarter, Eli. The fundraising numbers are starting to emerge. That's triple what Ron DeSantis pulled. His numbers went down as his polling also goes down. And I wonder what the view is now from your perch at Morning Consult as some members of the RNC question even continuing debates after next month.
I mean, what's the point of them at this point? I mean, you have the front runner with 3 in 5.
That's what Donald Trump says.
Among the electorate. That is what he says. And the Republican base is tuning this out, too. I mean, there was less interest in the second debate than there was in the first. There was no increase in support for anybody. I mean, after the first Republican debate, we saw Nikki Haley's support double, but it was from 3% to 7%. I mean, why does that even matter? Until the Republican candidates consolidate, if they are willing to consolidate, this is Donald Trump's to lose. The support is just too divided. If there are forces in the Republican Party who want to unseat Donald Trump, this race is going to have to narrow dramatically in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and Eli, I think it's interesting looking at Morning Consult's polling data because some of the candidates that were more well-known, like Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, is polling at, I believe, right now 1%. So it seems like whatever gain someone like Nikki Haley may get is coming from kind of those lower-tier candidates. It's not eating it all into Trump's lead. It's just kind of winnowing out the field at the bottom. Is that a right assessment?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a little bit of growth from Nikki Haley, from Vivek Ramaswamy, maybe from Ron DeSantis. But yeah, I mean, Tim Scott could barely make the first debate stage at 1% right now, which would probably be surprising to a lot of folks if you asked them 6 months ago. He was supposed to be sort of the star in line for the nomination. There's just no energy for him right now. We'll see what happens with Ron DeSantis. He did raise money. He has money to spend. Donald Trump obviously outraised him in the coming weeks and months as Ron DeSantis pushes to narrow the debate stage, maybe to try to get some consolidation up there for voters to see.
Eli, I had a conversation last evening with a Democratic operative here in Washington who was more concerned about no labels, was more concerned about RFK Jr., was more concerned about even Cornel West disrupting this election cycle in Donald Trump or whomever's favor than he was about any specific Republican candidate. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, Joe Biden does have these vulnerabilities. There is a small chunk, but a chunk of the electorate who wants to see somebody else. It's the same on the Republican side. That seems like the kind of scenario that could set up some of these defectors. And you don't need that many. Just ask Hillary Clinton what happened to her in Michigan in 2016. Clearly, that is something that the Biden campaign is concerned about. But he still has a modest advantage or tied with President Trump when you ask a head-to-head question for the generic ballot. But there is still a good chunk of the electorate, a meaningful chunk of the electorate that is undecided on this race and lacks enthusiasm for either Trump or Biden. No, the American people many folks don't want these candidates to be the nominees next year.
That's all at the presidential, Eli. But to circle back to where we started this conversation and just the sheer dysfunction we are seeing in the Republican side of the House of Representatives right now, when we think about the down ballot races, how do you think this impacts Republicans' chances to hang on to the House in 2024?
I mean, right now, the race for the House lines up pretty closely with the race for the White House. In polling, you do something called a generic congressional ballot. And those numbers mirror Biden and Trump's pretty closely among Democrats and Republicans, especially in an era of fewer ticket splitters. I think the 2024 race for Congress is going to align pretty closely with what's happening at the presidential level. I think this dysfunction on Capitol Hill, it'll be interesting to see if that feeds into how voters are even thinking about the White House next year.
Yeah, another snapshot from Eli Yokley. It's great to have you back, Eli, politics analyst at Morning Consult with myself and Kailey Leinz. Don't be a stranger, Eli. We'll do this again soon when you have some new research for us. This is Bloomberg. Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.